All right, we are on recording now. And if you choose not to be quiet while we're on recording, I will be happy to send your parent the link to the recording so they can see how class was spent today. We don't want it spent on flies. Okay, so we're going to talk about midpoints. And what a midpoint is, I'm going to take the first 2 points, A and B. I'm just going to take problem A. These are like problems. No one needs to see my face on this. Okay. So we have the point on A. We have 2 points. We have 0, 5. Now, one of the reasons I want to do this is to practice graphing coordinates because it's something we assume you know, but if you don't, this is a good time to learn it. Okay. When you have the point, straighten. Let me copy. Okay. All right, when I have a point and I have oh shoot, I have to choose this to keep it from messing up. Okay, on A, I have 2 points. I have 0, 5, and I have 0, negative 3. If I have 2 points and I want to find the midpoint, it just means, Chester, that I'm going to find the point directly in the middle of this little line segment I'm going to draw, right? Yeah, that's what a midpoint is. It's like we're going to graph these 2 points. Do you remember that the first number in a coordinate point represents your x-coordinate? And this is your x-axis right here. I'll outline it in blue. And then the second number in a coordinate pair, an ordered pair like this, represents your y-coordinate. And here's your y-axis. So, if I want to graph the point 0, 5, it's telling me go to the x-axis. I'll graph it in black. Go to the x-axis and find 0 on the x-axis, where it's right here, kind of in the crosshairs of those 2 points, right? And then if I'm going to go, then it says once you find the x, count up to the y that's on the second part. So I'm going to count up to this 5 right here, right? So 0, 5 would be right here. And then the other point was 0, negative 3. So that tells me go to the x-axis and find 0. Well, that's where I was before, right? And where is the y that's negative 3?
To the left.
Well, that would be an x of negative 3, but I go down. Yeah, if you did go down. Because remember that second part there, this negative 3 represents the y-axis. I want to go to the x and then count to the y here.
Whenever you look at
So the midpoint is 0, 1. We saw that. I cut the recorder off and forgot to cut it back on. Here's another way I could do it. If I have 2 points, 0, 5 and 0, negative 3, I could use the midpoint formula. All these points that we're describing, they have an x part and a y part, right? So I need to have both parts of the midpoint correct. And how you do this is if I want to find the midpoint, that means I got an x and a y, I need to figure out the x part first. Well, if I remember that the x's are here, I can label these if I wanted to. This is overdoing it. I'm going to show you the idea in a minute. I think it's much easier to think of the concept rather than just the formula. Now, how the formula works is, let's say I called this first point x1, y1, and I called the second point, that just means x of the first point, y of the first point. In math, you pronounce that x sub 1, y sub 1, but I'm just going to say x of the first point, y of the first point here, and we'll gradually transition into the mathematical notation so you're not listening to all this math speak and it's getting in the way. If this is the second point, this 0 here would be the x of the second point, and the negative 3 would be the y of the second point, right? I can label all 4 of those so that I can put them into the formula easily. The formula tells me if I want to find this midpoint x, what I do is I add x1 and x2 together and divide by 2. Here's x1, it's 0, so let me do that. And this is why I kind of wanted you to have another piece of paper. It'd be kind of hard to flip back and forth, so you can still use the back of this garage sale fundraiser if you want to. This is not going to be on the test. This is just us exploring a topic that you really kind of need to have been introduced to before you get into other classes. If I use this formula right here for the x's, I would say, well, my x1 is 0, and my x2 is 0, and I'm going to add them and divide by 2. 0 plus 0 on top of that fraction is 0, right? And then you got the 2 on the bottom. What is 0 over 2? It's actually 0. If you put in the calculator, if you want to think of it this way, just to kind of help you kind of get used to seeing these things, you would read it from the top to the bottom. You would say you'd type in 0 divided by 2, and you would get the calculator would tell you it's 0. So that's always a good thing. If you're not sure about something and you have your calculator, especially when you're doing your homework, you might try that just so that you get better at kind of recognizing them. If you're using your calculator at first and you're thinking about it, eventually you're going to not need it, But you always do the top divided by the bottom on a fraction. So my x-coordinate of my midpoint was supposed to be 0. Is that what I found when I counted it out? Just you counted in the middle of the line? We had it right over here, isn't it? Didn't we get 0 for the x over here also?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the y's. I'm going to pick a different color here. It was kind of hard to see that anyway. I'm going to try to do the y's down in this corner just because I want to try to keep everything on the same, page since we've already got it drawn. Yeah. So on the y's, if I'm trying to find the y part, which I'll write right down here because this is where I'm writing my midpoint when I found it with the formula. What I'm supposed to do is take the y1 and add the y2 to it. Okay, right up here, y1 was 5. y2 was -3, and then I'm supposed to divide by 2. So isn't 5 plus -3, isn't that the same thing as 5 minus 3? It is, isn't it? Yeah, it is basically. You define subtraction. The way mathematicians decided to come up with subtraction was they got tired of seeing 5 plus a negative number, and so they said, why don't we not write it that way? Why don't we just call it subtraction and we'll write it this way? That's really how they came up with it. Because, if you're at 5 on a number line and you add -2, negative means you go to the left, correct? So if you were at 5 and you added -3, sorry, it's a -3, isn't it? If I went 3 to the left, wouldn't I land at 2? That is what subtraction is. It's adding a negative number. It's all it is. And so the sooner you kind of get used to thinking that way, the easier a lot of stuff's going to be the next couple of years for you. It's really a big deal to kind of translate this to this is the same thing, and the sooner you kind of recognize it and grab hold of that idea, the easier a lot of things are going to come. If you don't get that, you're going to spend a lot of time confused, okay? So just try. You might even go back and listen to this later if you need to. All right, so 5 minus 3, or 5 plus -3, is 2. So 2 on top, and I'm running out of space to write, and 2 on bottom. What is 2 over 2? 1. Anything over itself is 1. So I'm getting 1 from my midpoint here. Is that what I had over here? I got the same thing, and I used the formula. Now, you can use the formula, and you can do all that labeling, but isn't this what's going on here? When I add the 2 x's up and divide by 2, aren't I just averaging those 2 x's that I get in my point? Isn't that what averaging is, adding and divided by 2? If I just looked at those points and went, oh, add the 2 x's. 0 plus 0 is 0. Divide by 2 is 0. I didn't have to do all that labeling and angsting about where I put each number and what I got to label, right? If I understand it, that's all we're doing. The middle of something is the average, isn't it? This really ties in a lot with the probability stuff we've been doing. Not the probability, but the statistics. We talked about the mean, right? Which is the average. This is all you're doing with this line is you're averaging the parts of it. The 2 y values, if you look at the y on the midpoint in the formula, isn't it just having you add the 2 y's together and then divide by 2? So isn't that just averaging the 2 y values? If you thought of it that way, would it be a little less stressful? I think it is. I think understanding what's going on is less stressful than trying sometimes to use a formula. So I think, and also understanding it fits in with what you already know about math, doesn't it? About finding an average or finding a middle number. So if I said 5 plus -3 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, I could have done that without, too much stress anyway.